please welcome to the stage the newly minted BC 40 Under 40 recipient, John Bromley. The founder and CEO of CHIMP, which many of you have heard of, a two-time TEDx speaker, a father, a troublemaker, and of course, national charity expert, John is on a mission to build a culture of giving across our country and our world. Today, John is the Capacity Conference final speaker. He'll share his thoughts on the state of the donor. John?
Thank you. Hello. How are you? Thanks for having me. Thanks to the people who put this conference on. You know, I think it's super important that there's opportunity and context to talk about and discuss charitable matter. And actually, there's not as much context to have that in forums where we're sort of cross charity and so anyway, I'm really psyched not just to be here today, but to be able to share my thoughts. I'm not sure if my slides are going to show up at some point. So until then, do I have to push something? So I've got a whole hour with you guys. Okay, so what I'm going to actually do, because it's 3:30 on a Friday and you guys have been here all day, I'm going to really drive through a couple things, and then I'm going to open it up and hope that we can actually have a good dialogue. And I'm really psyched to see that people are engaging so much with the speakers. So I hope that you've got a little bit more energy for me. I am here to sort of talk bigger picture. Okay, so I've got a couple asks for you. My ask for you today when I'm talking is going to be, try to think about yourself as, who you show up into, who you show up as in society, who you are with your family, who you are with your friends, and not just you as who you are working in or being closely involved with the charitable sector. Okay? Because what we're going to talk about right now is the state of the donor. It's my lens on the state of the donor. I should say that Najid, and if you guys don't know Najid, he's an incredible young individual who's pushing innovation in the charitable sector. When I showed up today, he goes, "John, are you going to be really negative?" Yes, Najid, I'm going to be super negative. I have no interest in being positive or negative about this conversation. My interest is to have an open and frank conversation about where donors are at today. My background, just to share really briefly. So I have a corporate finance and investment banking background. But that goes back over 10 years ago, last time I kind of had a real job. Since then, I've been only involved in the charitable sector, but I've never worked for a specific charity. I've been involved registering several hundred organizations, whether those are private foundations, public foundations, charitable organizations, or nonprofits. So I'm very comfortable and fluent on charity architecture, getting projects started. I've been involved raising well over $1 billion for the charity sector. And so my focus is really on donors. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I left kind of the more fundraising-centric area where I was working in the software space and moved into starting CHIMP. And CHIMP is a donor-advised fund. Does anyone here not know what a donor-advised fund is? And that's okay if you don't. Okay, so let me just explain it a little bit because I'm going to come back to it later. And I'm not at all here to pitch you on CHIMP. Most of you are with charities, is that right? Okay. A donor-advised fund, think of a donor-advised fund as a bank account for charity. So it is a charitable structure. You can put your money in and you're tax receipted immediately. Money can then sit in that account. It can also be invested from that account and then sent from there to any registered charity of the person's choice. So you can think of it as a bank account for charity, exclusively for charity, or you can think about it as a democratized version of a private foundation. Okay, so that's what I'm focused on, and the reason I'm doing that is because I am very, very concerned / interested in the state of the donor. Okay, let's get started. Okay, So what is the state of giving in Canada? Today I'm going to be referencing a bunch of stats, and these stats are stats that you can find in your own research actually, but most of them, what I'm going to be talking about, relate specifically to work that CHIMP did with the Angus Reid Institute on going out and serving Canadians. Again, we do not represent any specific charity or any specific cause, so we just represent the interest of the donor and the charitable sector. And I want to share a couple of things that we learned. Should we start with the good news, or should we start with the bad news? Well, because these slides had to get set in last night, you actually have no say in the matter. But because good was said first, we're going to roll with that. Love it. What is the good news? Yes, 71% of Canadians feel personal responsibility. That's a pretty high bar. Personal responsibility to make the world a better place. That is good. 30% of Canadians think they should be giving more. That's like more than 10 million people. Almost everybody thinks that charities play a very, very, very important role in society. 40% of donors would give more if they were approached in the right way. 48% of people talked to said, I'll give more when I find the perfect cause for me. And 66% of the most charitable people, what the survey referred to as, quote, super donors, learned how to give when they were young. I hope we have some time to discuss this. It's my personal, heavily considered view that the single biggest problem facing the charitable sector today is that there's increasingly nowhere to learn how to give. Najid, get out of here. I'm going to talk about the bad news. Okay. Canadians are giving less. Less people are giving. Now, do not confuse this with what I'm going to talk about here. I'm talking about participation in giving. What I'm not talking about is the amount of money being given away. The amount of money being given away in Canada is actually going up every year. What's the problem? The problem is it's coming from fewer and fewer people. Less Canadians are participating in giving. To those of you who are interested in this graph, this graph, and I could have chosen a few, but this is specifically Canadians who are submitting their tax receipts to CRA. So this is a pretty heavily downward trend. And it sort of also looks like a recent trend in Bitcoin. Okay. And here's another just little quick glimpse. We're giving less as a percentage of our income. So in 2006, we were giving almost 0.8% of what we earned, and it's dropped substantially since then. And I heard some comments earlier about religion and how religious donors are sticky. That shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Religious donors, whether you're a religious Jew or Christian or Muslim or you name it, there in those types of places, they talk about 10%, right? On average, people are giving very, 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 very much less than that. And it's also interesting to note, by the way, that the last statistic I saw on Christian giving in British Columbia was that the average tithe is now 2.5%. Big guy upstairs not going to be happy about that. Do you know that 50% of Canadians live paycheck to paycheck? So 51% of Canadians say, I don't have any money to give away. Now, it'd be really interesting to tie that back into education, and because this is interesting to me when I think about the reality that people who are lower income give a higher percentage of their money away, and stuff like that. But that stuff's usually true, and we can talk about empathy and all the reasons why that might be true. But I think it's important to recognize as charities that Canadians are feeling squeezed. 55% of Canadians have concerns about legitimacy and the effectiveness of charities. Now, there's a bunch of stats out there, by the way, that sort of say trust in charities is going up. Okay, there's some big global studies on that, and that's in comparison to like how you feel about the government and corporations. This is specifically coming from individual Canadians sort of saying, you know what, I don't have a lot of confidence with regards to legitimacy. It's kind of strange because every qualified donee in Canada, every registered charity in Canada is public and you can find information out about them, and effectiveness. Anyway, hugely concerned about that. And a vast majority of people who we talked to said, you know what, I'd give more if I felt just more confident about the whole thing. I realize some of this language is vague, okay? But I think that's important because donors are not confident in the legitimacy of charities, and when you talk to them, they can't really give you many details on that. But it's a feeling, and let's not disregard that feeling. They don't think charities are particularly effective. Well, tell me what that means to you. I don't have much to say about that, but I still have that feeling. I'd give more if I was approached in the right way, if fundraising looked a little bit better to me. Well, tell me about that. Actually, they've got a lot more specifics to say about that matter. 66% of people do not know how to find out whether a charity is legit. They don't know how to look up whether a soliciting organization is real. And 64% of donors, 64% of non-donors are very open about the fact that they really weren't exposed to giving at all when they were young. Anyone in here not know how to do math? Anyone here not learn math when they were a kid? Get my point? We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about education later. So, Najid, I don't think this is too negative. This is my view on donors. It's kind of a conundrum. Okay, let's try to take a look. Sorry, this is going to be a bit small for people at the back of the room. But there's like both really, really good and exciting news about people and donors, and there's also some really bad stuff. People feel personal responsibility. They want to get involved, but they're not doing it. Darn. Canadians want to give more, but they're feeling poor. Charities are important in society. Everyone likes charities, but on the other hand, they've got serious doubts about charities. It only takes fixing how you go about your fundraising and people are going to give more to you. But people are just not confident as donors. They want to find what's perfect for them as a cause, but people are literally, they're not doing their homework. I read something really interesting the other day. 50% of people don't do any research on new charities that they give to. Learning, particularly when you're young, definitively develops donors. But increasingly, there's nowhere to learn how to give, especially in an objective way. There's nowhere really to go to get objective learning on charity. Canadians and Americans are both similar in that increasingly they only give when they're asked, when they're fundraised at. Okay, so lots of stats there, rolled through those, a lot of vague stats. Remember, this is just what people are saying. This is really a sentiment analysis on the donor. This is where people are at with regard to the charitable sector, and all of those things corroborate with all of my experience over the last 12 years in this space. A couple of things are changing, though, in the world, and let's just look at that quickly. Again, we're looking sort of at a macro view here, right? The Trump effect. Anyone heard of Donald Trump? Unfortunately, what is sort of fortunate of this unfortunate situation, if you're not a fan, is that people are getting off the couch. you know, this Me Too movement, right? Black Lives Matter. There are movements going on that in an interesting way to me weren't really happening at the same level when we were so inspired about with someone like Obama in the office. It's like, well, he's going to take care of that, so I'm going to go home, sit on the couch, and watch Netflix. Increasingly, Donald Trump is having an effect that's really getting people off the couch. Cause marketing. Corporations are paying attention to this, and they are also moving into the space. There's a lot to say about cause marketing. So one reason why more corporations are moving into the space is because I think generally, I mean, Trump effect is a little bit short-term in nature, but generally the trend is definitely towards social responsibility. You know, vast majority of millennials, something like 80% of millennials say they will switch brands to those that are socially responsible. Corporations are taking note of that. Also, people don't want to work for companies that aren't socially responsible. That's increasingly true as well. Okay, so this is going on. But what also is happening is that corporations are getting involved with things with charities. And for example, you're seeing a lot of giving happening at the till, like when you're shopping. Just a personal thought for a second. So that graph I showed earlier that shows about 21% of Canadians are making charitable donations and and filing their tax suits with the government. So 21%, and yet 82% of people that are sort of surveyed by Statistics Canada say that they give to charities or nonprofits. And, you know, if it was 30% and 21%, I could, you know, okay, I'd get that. Maybe 40% and 21%, I could get that. 82% and 21%, I didn't really understand until I learned that 66% of people report giving at the till. So on the one hand, that's awesome, especially if you're a charity who's getting some of that dough. But if this donor that we're talking about today is kind of like, yes, I take responsibility, but no, I don't really act on that. And, you know, yeah, I've got some confidence issues, you know, with charity, but I really want to get more involved. If we're in this donor conundrum, if we have increasingly people on the street who don't really feel that confident in themselves about how they go about making a difference in the world, particularly as it relates to giving to charities, the question I think charities need to be asking about cause marketing is what are we confusing donors? I'll tell you what I worry about. I worry about my kids growing up kind of going, well, you know, Dad, I bought some Tom's shoes, so I don't need to give to charity. Right? I would say, amen, son. Please do wear socially responsible shoes. But do not think that that's an excuse enough to not get involved with charity. So back to state of the donor, okay? I have concerns that I think are legitimate about the increased role that corporations play in charities, particularly when donors are not as confident and educated as they should be about how to go about making a difference themselves. A couple other things on trends. The options people have today to make a difference, like, they're everywhere. Charities are like no longer like they're no longer the first option. Couple things. Crowdfunding is really a tool, but crowdfunding in most cases is referenced in the context of like GoFundMe. Facebook's now in the fundraising game. Are people familiar with that? Okay, so what's important to recognize here from the charity sector is in the fastest growing components of crowdfunding, which by the way is huge business. GoFundMe is now doing over $1 billion a year in transactions. These are generally speaking not charitable transactions, and I'm defining charitable at law. These are not donations that are going to charities. These are donations that are going to things that people are just raising money for. The fastest growing part of the crowdfunding market inside of that world is giving money to people who you know or have been convinced have medical issues, and it's funding it directly. That's interesting and maybe dangerous, but confusing, I think, again, for donors. Clearly, when it's not in the charitable sector, this is not a regulated context. Online advocacy. Slacktivism. I'll just group these two things together. You can go around and tweet and retweet charity stuff, charity content. You can sign petitions. All of this stuff is super available now, and that's all really positive, just like cause marketing, except to the extent that it kind of gets people in the mindset like, well, I liked that on Facebook, so I'm not going to go and do this over here, right? The other thing that is really shifting is impact investing. 10 years ago, impact investing was so niche, so small. Today, impact investing is huge, and increasingly, particularly in the high net worth donor area, people are shifting to sort of an impact investment mentality, and what it's doing is it's causing a lot of conversations that I'm in about people who are going, well, do I invest my money for social change, or do I give my money away? The more sophisticated and educated a donor is, in my experience, that just becomes an interesting conversation. But I'm here looking out 10 years, and I'm going, I wonder which of these things is going to turn out to be a positive blessing for the sustainability and growth of benevolence, and which of these things is actually going to be a component that leads to, I don't know, just to be really negative, the demise and the non-sustainable effect of the charitable sector. Okay. Wow, we got a lot of time left. Maybe I'm moving too fast. If I end early, I'll go back through and give you different thoughts on each slide. Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, sure. Let's take a question. Oh, yeah. Anyone actually want to share a definition of slacktivism? Just to take a little break here. It's a great question. Yeah.
I've not heard the term, but
Okay.
sorry. I've not heard the term, but I assume it's an amalgamation of slacker. So lazy activism.
And activism, right. So actually, so I'll give you two views on this. Slacktivism is often used, particularly by the charitable sector, in a really negative way. It's like, oh, those guys are just, retweeting and tweeting and, and liking stuff on Facebook. And and so they're being activists in that way, but they're really just sort of doing it from the comfort of their own home or from their cell phone, right? And it's often viewed negatively, again, I think in this context of confusion, and that's where they're correct. If you retweet something and that's all you ever do for benevolence, I think we should have some problems with that in this room. But on the other hand, let's not pretend as though social media isn't an incredible innovation to help promote and virally spread messages. Okay, so slacktivism needs to be a part of your fundraising strategy, frankly. Okay, let's talk about a couple trends. Okay, and again, I want to remind you that my job here today is to sort of pull up and be at a macro view. Okay. The reason I asked you about donor advised funds before is because this is serious stuff, and I mean, it's partly why I chose the donor advised fund as my approach to empowering people to act on their innate generosity. But I'm going to show you some stats from the United States. Okay, donor advised funds are the fastest growing part of the charitable sector, and that is not going to change anytime soon. So total assets in donor advised funds, look at that. They've more than doubled in 4 years. The stats on 2017 are going to be over 100 billion. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, great question. Happy to answer that one. So we remember what a donor advised fund is, right? We talked about that. So anyone heard of the Vancouver Foundation? Yeah, or the term community foundation? Generally speaking, community foundations are powered by donor advised funds. They're funded through donor advised funds, meaning like you can go to the Vancouver Foundation and create a donor advised fund. So in Canada, community foundations are one huge part, and then you nailed it on the second part. Financial institutions also often have them. They, in my opinion, do them very poorly, but they have them. So you could go to Royal Bank, for example, and actually you might meet CHIMP, but you're likely to meet something called Gift Funds Canada. Who's ever heard of them? Not sure. You have. Well done. And they've got like $500 million worth of assets. Because if you're, a client of RBC, particularly in the high net worth world, like a client of Dominion Securities or something, which is, their kind of investment counselor area, and you want to talk about charity, you're going to be able to put your money in a donor advised fund with them. And guess who manages the money? RBC. That's why financial institutions are interested in donor advised funds, because it's kind of as a banker, a former banker, reformed banker, it's an asset gathering strategy, and that's actually really cool. The problem happens what happens if that money doesn't leave the donor advised fund and just stays, in the account. So look at this. In 2016, 23 billion, these are billions, $23 billion was given to donor advised funds. About 15 billion came out. Now so this year those numbers will look like probably like 25 billion came out, 100 billion in assets. So that's certainly higher than your disbursement quota. For those of you who know what disbursement quota is, the amount of money charities have to give away, every year. Measly, bad regulation in my view, measly 3.5% in Canada. In the United States, it's 5%. The difference between Canada and the United States is that in the United States it's 5%, but it includes the cost of administration. So arguably Canada's a little healthier on that. Okay, so the rise of the donor advised fund is going to continue. Okay, let's talk about the future. In the future, everyone's going to have their own giving account, their own impact resume, and there will be a social network of social change. I am entirely convinced that this will be a donor advised fund. I'm going to talk about some of what this means to charities in a little bit, and then again open it up to conversation. But I just want to get to another prediction. Corporate social responsibility, or CSR, right, is going to continue its shift towards focusing on people, employees and customers, and away and less on charities. Now, let me just explain what I mean there. What I don't mean is that corporations are going to start giving less to charity. I actually think they're going to give more to charity. The shift is going to be how they do it. It's going to be a shift away from the old school of CSR, which is, and let's go back 20 years just to make it a little easier to process, a small room of like executives or who kind of pick charities of their choice and just send checks out the door, and that's the end of it. Money straight from the corporation to the charity in the form of a check. So that's this, from corporation giving to the charity and then actually spending even more money to tell people about it. It's one of the major inefficiencies of CSR, actually, because they go straight to charity. It's who knows where corporations give? Right? And so when you think about why corporations give, particularly if you think strictly through a financial lens and sort of say, well, corporations really in financial theory don't give money away to charities to be good. They give money away to charities because they believe it's going to lead to more sales. So like if we can be honest about that, this model is really flawed because the corporation's giving to charity and then they're going, oh, I've got to spend more money to tell people. And when you get inside corporate social responsibility departments and corporations, particularly with mid-sized corporations, people will tell you that they spend as much money on trying to promote what they do for CSR as they do giving to charities. That's highly ineffective. The future of this, I think, is going to be way more corp giving to people and people giving to charities. You. Well, both. Okay, so there's a huge trend in employee matching, which, by the way, is always driven by a donor-advised fund, generally speaking, at least the sophisticated programs. The reason why corporations should have to use a donor-advised fund to run employee matching is because if they really care about their employees, and in my considered view, if they really care about developing their employees as engaged citizens, they have to let their employees choose which charities they give to. There's 85,000 registered charities in Canada. So, you can't just choose 4 and then match donations to those 4. You use a donor advised fund and you say, hey, if you put money in your own giving account, we're going to match money into that giving account, and then you can give it away wherever you want. That's how that's how corporate matching programs are working at the biggest corporations. That's how TELUS now does it. We're in the TELUS building. And you're going to see that trend continue. The other thing that is going to happen is corporations are going to start giving money to their customers to give away. I'm now speaking a bit more on the leading edge side, but I think the future of giving at the till is going to shift away from, you're there buying your hammer at Home Depot and you got your saw and your kids, you're trying to, where are the kids? Crap. And they're like, would you like to give $2 towards so-and-so? Actually, we surveyed this, if you want me just to spend a minute on this. What's interesting is that, first of all, 66% of people report giving that way. That's a little confusing. Yeah, I gave my $2 there, so I don't need to do anything else. So that's a problem if that happens. But people are really cynical also about what happens after the fact. I'm going to have my number wrong here, but it's close to 50% of people believe that most corporations are not giving their own money away to charities, the ones raising money at the till. They're just taking your money and then passing it through. So that's maybe a different form of GST. I don't know. So this is a trend, okay? Like, I think this is serious. And this is some of what it's going to lead to. Okay, so now we're in the sort of charities fundraising space from these increasingly really psyched to get involved citizens who don't really know how. Charities are going to have less direct control in fundraising. Over the next 20 years, I think there's going to be a materially dramatic shift in fundraising. Today, if I was going to tell you what I really think I'd say, if it weren't for fundraising, the amount of money that was going to the charity sector would drop a lot. Increasingly, people only give to charity because they're asked. So thank you, fundraising. Thank you, fundraising. But there's a problem in fundraising. First of all, if you reference some earlier slides, people aren't all that excited about how that whole fundraising thing goes about, okay? But the macro view that's problematic with fundraising is that while fundraising does, and I'd love it if someone disagreed with me and we can talk about this after, but what fundraising definitively does is it creates a supply of charitable dollars for charities, particularly the ones that spend a lot of time and money on fundraising. Do you know that 60% of the dollars raised in Canada go to 1% of charities? Okay, is that because 99% of charities are crap? Or is it because 1% of charities spend a lot of time and money on fundraising? It's the second one. Okay, where was I going? Okay, so fundraising is critical, but what it does do, which is critical, is it creates a supply of charitable dollars for charities. Oh, phew, thank you. Fundraising. But what is it not doing? It's not developing donors. It's failing at developing people to become more engaged with the charitable sector. 75% of people report to have learned nothing at all, or their knowledge of charity has stayed the same by being a donor. Okay, I'm not sure if I've been clear with that. Let me say that again. So I think, again, my number's going to be a little bit off here, but about 15% of people who give say, I know less about how to go about giving today, despite the fact that I'm giving than I used to. So 15% of people are kind of saying, I'm getting dumber as a donor. And about 50% of people saying, like, by giving to charities, I'm not getting any more knowledgeable. That's messed up. So fundraising is not developing donors, but it is raising money for charities. Whoa. The other evidence, by the way, of why I sincerely believe that to be true is because in the last 20 years, and I've been very actively involved in the charity sector for over a decade now, the velocity at which fundraising takes place, the amount of asks, thanks to web-based giving and all of this stuff, is increasing, but the amount of people participating in charities going down. Okay, charities will have less direct control, less direct fundraising control. So what is going to happen? How are charities going to deal with this? I think that there's going to be two major things that are going to happen. There's going to be more causal charity partnerships. Have people heard of this term collective impact? Yeah, you can kind of look it up, and it's important. But generally speaking, and very loosely defined, I would define in a lay context, collective impact is like causal charity partnerships. So more charities coming together to address a problem in society. And I think that there's going to be a rise of charity brokers. Anyone ever heard that term before? What's a charity broker? Anyone manage money? Any investment managers in the house? No, charities conference. Okay, that's cool. Anyone have money that's being managed for them? Okay, so me too. Who could name, without guessing, who can name like more than 10 stocks that they definitively know are in their RRSP? Okay. Why am I sharing this? Tens of everyone in Canada at some level has money managed in the markets, and almost no one knows how to pick stocks. So why is it in the charity world that we think people can pick charities? As a former investment banker, I've got a pretty decent amount of financial fluency, and I don't spend any time picking stocks. And in fact, the more I do it, the crappier my returns are. What I do know, though, is I know the kind of things I'm interested in investing in. I pay attention to trends. So I can say, hey, I'm interested in clean energy of the tidal and wind variety, let's say. But I can't name you tidal companies or wind energy companies. But I know people who can. And when you talk to donors, back to some good news, everybody knows what they care about changing in the world. It's not a hard question to talk to any citizen about what they care about changing in the world. What do you care about changing in the world? Oh, I really care about the environment. Really? Cool. Tell me more about that. Oh, more trees than ocean. Okay, trees, ocean, okay. Whereabouts? Well, British Columbia, really cool. do you have something to give towards that change you want to make? Yeah, I do. I've got time, I've got talent, I've got treasure. Who are you going to give it to? They don't know. People know what they care about changing the world. They know they have something to give towards that, but they don't know how to close that loop. So, and what fundraising does, by the way, generally speaking, without kind of complicating it with the United Ways and the more collective kind of approach to fundraising, what fundraising does is it goes straight to donor with the individual charity. And generally speaking, it's kind of like wind energy company X coming directly to you to ask you to make an investment. That does not happen in the finance world, and where it happens, it's in a very niche and, generally speaking, very high net worth world. So I think there's going to be a huge rise of charity partnerships and charity brokers who are managing causal portfolios. I would venture that there's at least 10 people in the room today who, in a conversation with me, could say, you know what? If I could make a living at investing into causal, charitable kind of subject matter X, that you would do a better job of giving my money away to that cause than I would doing it myself. So there's going to be more of that. What that is about, though, ultimately, is charities having less direct-to-consumer, direct-to-donor fundraising control. I think this is a no-brainer. Data-based impact narrative will continue to thrive. I think the last panel talked a bunch about this, so I'm not going to go too deeply into this. I'll just share a couple of these points. Data and data visualization will become more important. People have a really short attention span, and they want to know immediately how it is you are using my money effectively and legitimately to make change in the world. And they just want to know right now. That's not fair, but that's what they want. And I think that telling the full kind of robust story, which, by the way, is very, very difficult to do, is going to become more important to smaller audiences. So charities definitely have to think kind of, what was Art Starts was talking about, importance of art. Couldn't agree more. How do you use art to kind of communicate the change that your charity's making? That's going to become more important. People are going to expect. The internet has some negative flaws to it. One of them is it's sort of creating this trend where people expect just to see some like simple breakdown and to look at it and say, oh, that's good and this one's bad. So there's gonna be more of that. Okay, so just generally speaking, and this is the last piece. So get your questions ready. Disagree with me, please. Let's go. What do charities do? First of all, understand donor advised funds. I mean, listen, if I was going to tell you some of my business plan, I'd say, listen, give me 3 years, I'm going to have 1 million donor advised funds at CHIMP. 1 million. We've got about 50,000 right now that, that's probably more than all the community foundations across Canada, combined, but that's nothing. Everyone in the future is going to have their own giving account. You have your own bank account. Why don't you have your own giving account? Everyone's going to have one. Get to know the donor advised fund. Understand it. What are its pros? What are its cons? Also, understand the competition to charity in general. How do people carry out benevolence without giving to charities? The most material place that's happening right now is in this, quote, crowdfunding, non-charitable crowdfunding environment. GoFundMe is your competition. Someone raising money for their cancer illness directly is the competition to the BC Cancer Society. Okay, point number 2. Care deeply about fundraising UX. Okay, I even wrote it out here. User experience. Care deeply about the experience your donors have with you. And despite all the vagueness in those opening slides that I shared, wrap your head around that. You know, I'm not going to stand here and tell you what exactly, you know, it means to be legitimate or not, but I'm I'm really advocating that it's important to take this concern that Canadians have about your legitimacy and about your effectiveness seriously. These are, quote, sales objections to giving charity. People are not giving charity because they don't think you're legitimate and effective. They're not giving more because they don't like the way you're fundraising from them. Care deeply about the user experience. And when I talk to my own staff about this, because we have our own user experience problems with CHIMP, by the way, just put yourself in their shoes. Like, what annoys you about fundraising? I'm sure the charity you work for doesn't do that, by the way. Okay? But what annoys you about fundraising? And that's what annoys me and every other Canadian. Shift your communications to be impact-centered. When I was thinking about like what I wanted to say here, you know, trying to be succinct, I wasn't able to articulate it clearly, so I'm going to articulate it unclearly to you. Generally speaking, fundraising can be translated into the for-profit world as sales. And if you want to be nice, you can call it marketing too. But let's just use the sales word for now. You want to be less sales-oriented and more marketing-oriented. And the marketing, which is the narrative and the data, really has to be focused on the impact. When you do dig into effectiveness of charities, there's two major things that come up. Well, and then there's one overarching thought that people say. The overarching thought people say is, I have no idea what happens to my money after I give. Okay. Thanks for sharing. The two things are, charities spend too much on fundraising and administration. And, well, then literally the second one said, the big overarching thing said differently, just, you know, what do they do with my money? So I think if you tell the story and all of your communications increasing as they shift to sort of the impact you make in society, people are going to be able to wrap their head around that more easily. They want transparency there, even though they don't know what to ask for. And then the last thing I'd say is seek out and start to promote partnerships with other charities. And the hard thing to get your head around there as a fundraising charity, and listen, fundraising is critically important, is how am I ever going to have a relationship with my donor if that's the case? Well, there's some difficult answers there that I think it is possible over time. But what you need to remember is that what people do know is they know what they care about changing in the world, and they know they have something to give towards that, but they don't know how to get to you, and when you get to them, they talk about being annoyed. So what I think that people need to be able to kind of go in and sort of say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in BC forests, and interact with an intermediary who's going to be like a charitable broker who's going to place their money for them. Okay, that's the end. Let's discuss, shall we? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Am I coming to you?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a question around donor-advised funds and the advisory component and this area of ethics around influence. So I understand that you've mentioned that donors need some more education about where to give. So at CHIMP, what's your next step? Like, do you bring donors to that area of the forest in BC and then match make with them? And again, what is the ethics of influence that you practice at CHIMP?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So let me be indirect in my answer, then I'll be direct. Number one problem in the charity sector, there's nowhere to learn how to give. Number two problem in the charity sector with people who aren't young, there's nowhere to get objective giving advice. Fundraising is not objective. CHIMP's view is we are completely neutral. We are not paid by charities, and we have no interest to influence where people give. Our interest is to empower people to act on their innate generosity. That's actually our purpose statement. Our mission at CHIMP is to nurture people to think, act, and feel like philanthropists. So the only cause we promote is getting involved in giving. What people do with their money is really totally up to them. And I think that if you don't make those your own decisions about that, you're never ever going to become a better donor. So I would rather donors come in and make mistakes by, for example, giving to bad charities, whatever that is, to them, and learn from that. What's analogous to this world, if you're interested in financial literacy, if you study kids who were paid an allowance when they were young, those kids way more often than not go on to be good at spending money. And I can relate to that. Not that I'm particularly good at spending money. Well, I'm good at spending it. I'm not necessarily good at spending it well. But I learned at a very early age this concept of opportunity cost, because I kept going to 7-Eleven and buying candy and getting frustrated because my parents wouldn't just buy me the skateboard I wanted. So I had to sort of learn that, well, if you spend money over here, you don't have money to spend over there. I think these are the kind of things that donors have to really learn. I'll give you an example of what we're doing there, and then we'll go to another question. We've started programs in schools and also with sports teams where we're raising money, fundraising, from high net worth donors to give money to kids for them to give away. So if you're in a Jewish school in the city or a couple select schools, we're just in beta right now, we're only dealing with about 1,000 kids, you're earning $10 a month of charity dollars to give away to any registered charity of your choice. We have no interest in what charities get that money, and it's not possible to take money out of a donor advised fund to go spend on a Ferrari or bubblegum. So it's really just about what are the kids going to go through and how are they going to spend that money. So we are really keen about being objective and letting donors give their money away on their own. What we do allow, and what we're going to start allowing more and more, and what we'll build product for, is this whole charitable brokerage concept.
I've just checked our charity on your site, and I work for a national charity that is a federated model, and I noticed that we have just under 100 records. So same name, just under 100 records. Where are federations going?
You mean federated models?
Federated models, yeah.
Most federations operate a little bit more like where the federations are. Okay, let me try to be succinct about this. I think that there's going to be less of them in the future. I think they're going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to the local organizations are going to become kind of organizing areas, and there's going to be one macro brand that's going to power everything at the top. And then what you'd find is those charities farther down the pole, because the top guy is asking for control, these are going to, voluntarily revoke their registrations. And I think that, so first of all, that is happening right now. And I think what's also going to happen is that just new federation models are not going to get started. So charity entrepreneurs in the future, people who are using charitable structures to carry out whatever change they want to have in the world, are going to just register the one entity, and they're not going to register all the other ones. And by the way, donor advised funds, at least the way I envision them in the future, which don't look the way the financial institutions do them, it's not just a storehouse for money, it's a social network of change. If people know generally what foundations are and how they're different from charitable organizations, generally speaking, the future is there's not going to be a lot of foundations. I mean, you can come and register a donor advised fund for free. I used to register about 50 private foundations a year. Now I'm doing about 7. Okay. And that's not because we're doing less advisory to philanthropists. That's because more people are choosing the donor advised fund route. And then even public foundations, really all that is it's just a place to catch money, and public and private foundations still have to give money to qualified donees. They can't carry out their own activity. So it's really just about moving money and managing relationships with donors, if I can be so honest. So those will disappear too, and they'll be powered by donor advised funds. They'll only be put in place when they really, really need it. it's free to get a donor advised fund in a world like CHIMP. So that means it's free to have a public foundation and a private foundation, and increasingly people will be using those tools, and then they'll just be sending money to the charitable organization. I think the future of the foundation is not going to decline in importance, but the number of entities that are registered are going to go away because people register charities for pragmatics because there's not other ways of going about it, and the donor advised fund model is going to fundamentally change that.
You said that we are pretty good at raising money as fundraisers, but we are not really good at raising donors. And then how 50% of people who are giving, they're saying they haven't learned anything. So what can we do about that? Is this our job? And if it is, what can we do?
Yeah. So I am of the view that the donor conundrum is more the donor's fault than it is the charity's fault. The problem with that, though, is that the donors aren't going to do anything about it. So the charities are going to have to, okay? So that's why I wanted to sort of come here and have an honest conversation about some of this stuff. It's not all bad fundraising practices that are causing, people to leave the charitable sector. There's very little evidence of that, despite the fact that everyone's saying I would give more if. I'm of the view that, like, if you know anything about charity, it's not very difficult to establish whether a charity is legit. And if you know a little bit more about charity and you have some opinions, whether they're right or wrong, it's not that difficult to determine in your own view, especially whether a charity is effective or not. So the biggest problem, I think, is that there's just not a lot of charity literacy. And I think that fundraising at a macro level is to blame for that. Because fundraising isn't about developing donors, despite the fact that you could say, well, it's about developing a relationship with my organization. Absolutely, but it's not about developing a holistic and literate and citizenly engaged donor who just goes out there and wants to save the world no matter which organization gets their money. Fundraising is really about getting money for your organization, and while that's important, when so many charities are now focused just on fundraising for themselves, and there's no kind of umbrella body in the organization really working to develop donors, that's where I think a lot of these problems are coming from. Well, so, if I really knew, I would have just sent an email. Najid would have read it. So, I can tell you what I'm doing about it, and then I'll tell you a couple things. First of all, I'm spending time and money and investing into, design thinking systems for how to raise charitably engaged kids. And all the economics literature I read and the behavioral science literature I read and education theory I read is really just kind of saying, well, it really does matter when you just give people money in the context of finance world for them to experience how to use it. So first of all, that's what I'm doing. The second thing I'm doing is I'm trying to build anyways, a socially networked charitable bank so that everyone can have their own giving account. And to be super objective about that and to be super strict about our objectiveness so that really all they're doing is they're using us as a donor-centered tool to empower the change that they want to make and to give that money away from there. So I think what charities need to do is, I'd say, back to one of my last slides, I really think you have to start grappling with the reality of the state of the donor. They want change in the world, but they really don't know how to make it. They think charities are important, but they also have a lot of doubts about charities. And trying to tweak your fundraising experience to deal with that and your communications to talk through the lens of what it is you're actually doing with their money. So I can't tell you many more specifics without getting into the inside of the organization. It's also not but it's a good question, and I'm sorry, can't wave a magic wand. I think it's a generational thing. Yeah.
So we're on CHIMP, and the only time we've gotten funding from it is from an existing donor who, sort of kind of raised money through that. And I'm wondering, we've never gotten anything that just sort of flowed through without us doing any work. So if we're going to invest our time, wouldn't we just kind of invest with that donor to get them to donate directly to us rather than to get people to donate to this other thing that then goes to us? Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I do. The average donor in the United States gives to 4 charities. So, and when you do that, and let's say it's 10 or let's say it's 2, and you think about the user experience of the donor, they've got 4 tax receipts to claim. They're on 4 charity fundraising lists. They're on. So, I have stopped going to charities to sell them on CHIMP. It was a waste of time. Generally speaking, A, literacy was lower than I wanted it to be, and B, there were sort of these objections to sort of like, you know, why would I use something like CHIMP when I can just get them to give to me? Well, donors don't like the fundraising experience. I bet you I'm going to win. I don't want to win because I want to steal donors from you. I want to win because I want to solve the problem of the state of the donor. So since doing that, by the way, I have moved from sort of doing about 50 million through CHIMP a year to 125, and I did over 130 or 40 million through CHIMP in the last 4 months. So what's going to happen is people are going to go, okay, I want to give. And we believe generosity is innate. We don't believe, despite the fact that people only give today because they're asked, we don't believe that the root of giving is because you're asked to give. We believe it's because it's who you are as a human. Altruism is real. And if I'm wrong on that, bummer. I mean, we're all screwed. So we're interested in giving donors tools to make it easy for them to engage. And when more people engage, more money will flow into the sector. And I think what's cool for charities is that they're going to be able to shift their work from just fundraising to program delivery. So maybe I'll end on this, and especially if you're in a smaller charity, our interviews with smaller charities, particularly with the executive directors who found and the founders of these charities, who kind of went into the sector to make a difference, get really frustrated by the fact that increasingly they're not doing programmatic activity, they're fundraising. They're spending all their time fundraising. Generally speaking, that's because donors aren't just giving fluently. So I'm not sure I have an answer to your question without going into a sales pitch. I'm just not worried about the fact that like donors are going to choose to give directly to charities as soon as finally they get a tool that's built for them and with only them in mind, no matter which registered charity they care to give to. So if some of what I say is true about the future of the Donor Advised Fund, and if I'm wrong, then go nuts, keep fundraising. Certainly don't shift all your focus to donor advised funds. I'm talking about trends here. What's going to happen is that you're going to have to come into various donor advised funds. You're going to have an account presence there. And those donor advised funds that are on the cutting edge are going to spend time giving tools to charities to help them locate people. One of the most expensive parts of the fundraising funnel, as I'm sure you can relate, is donor acquisition. If donors can come in and say, I care about forests in BC, and I like medium-sized charities, all of a sudden, and I can provide that data to you without giving you their name, until they choose to give you their name, I can say, well, here's the type of people you want to come in and fundraise for. And by the way, that's how LinkedIn works if you've ever tried to hire someone, particularly in a for-profit setting. So that future of LinkedIn is going to happen in the charity sector. So it's not a very good answer to your question. It's a really good question, but I don't have an answer for you without going to a sales pitch. And I don't want to, and that's not why we're here. And we don't have time.
Ladies and gentlemen, here, take it back. I just wanted to thank John Bromley.